They traded her like a debt note into the hands of the man folks swore to fear. Out here, where the sun bakes the dust into scars, folks trade souls like cattle, cheap and silent. They handed a young woman off to a man folks whispered about, the feared rancher Greyhawk, half Comanche, all trouble, his back a map of old whippings. Nobody looked back. Nobody offered pity. But with one meeting of eyes, her whole life buckled, starting down a road no one else dared to walk. They brought him out into the sun with nothing but the dust for a witness. No boots on his feet, shirt half torn. The people of Dry Creek Crossing stood in the road like fence posts, faces hard and unmoved. The marshal spat in the dirt and said his name like it was the taste of something gone bad. Colt Mercer, part Comanche, they called him, the kind of man whose story kept children quiet at night. He did not speak. He did not lower his eyes when the townsfolk called him savage or threw a rock at his cheek, drawing blood beneath the cheekbone. He stood still as a fence post set deep. The only thing that moved was the wind and the shadow of a bird that cut across the red dirt. June Whitlow watched from the edge of the crowd. Her father's grip on her arm was cold and hard as a brand. She looked at Colt, at the way the sun burned stripes on the scars across his back, and something in her own chest burned along with it. Her father shoved a yellowed paper into the marshal's hand, the kind of paper a man gets when the bank owns more of him than he does. One signature and the debt is gone. One signature and a daughter walks out of town as a stranger's property. Evelyn, her stepmother, stood by, bonnet pulled low, silent. She never looked at June, not once. No prayers, no tears. Only a mutter, better you than the rest of us, like it was a kindness. But kindness has sharp edges in a place like this. The marshal untied Colt and shoved a dull knife into his palm, then handed him an old shirt, crusted with someone else's sweat. "She's yours," he said. Colt looked at the shirt, then at June. The only words he spoke were dry and hard. "I ain't your jailer." No preacher, no ring, no words of blessing. Only the wind and the dust and the quiet hatred in the eyes of men who would sell anything if the price was right. Colt took the mule's reins. He started down Mesquite Road without looking back. June followed because there was nothing else left to do. Her feet ached in her old boots. Every step away from Dry Creek Crossing was a step further from anything she knew. Behind her, the saloon door creaked in the wind. A crow landed on the roof and watched them go. Nobody wished them luck. Nobody called her name. The townsfolk went back inside, and only the dust remained. They walked. Colt did not look at her. His shoulders were broad, his steps steady, and he walked with the slow certainty of a man who had nowhere to go but on. When the sun was high and the world was still as bone, he stopped and handed her a battered blanket. He slept without one, arms folded over his chest. Back to a fence post. He watched the road while she lay awake, listening to the night. Coyotes called out from the bluffs, and the cold cut through the dark like a knife. In the morning, June washed her face in a muddy puddle, the water so cold it hurt. She saw her reflection there, hollow-eyed, lips cracked, hair tangled from the wind. She did not cry. She had nothing left to spend on tears. They moved on. Dust in their teeth, sun on their backs, silence between them thick as wet clay. Every now and then, Colt would stop, scan the horizon. He said nothing about the set of hoofprints that shadowed theirs. He only pressed on, and she followed. There was a kind of strength in him, not the kind you see in the stories, no grand gestures, no rough laughter, just a quiet, unbending thing, hard as the land itself. June thought of the look in his eyes, the way he did not flinch when they spat at him, and something inside her wondered if a man who stands alone might be the last safe place in a world like this. That evening, as the sun bled down over the mesquite hills, she watched him gather the last of the firewood, his hands sure and silent. He handed her the blanket without a word. When he sat across the fire, the only sound between them was the puffing of sap in the branches and the low hush of the prairie wind. In the dark, June closed her eyes and wondered if fear and hope ever came from the same place. Behind them, somewhere in the dying light, the sound of a single rider echoed off the stones. They walked until the town shrank behind them. No sound but the hush of dry grass and a mourning dove calling from the fence line. The world spread out wide, nothing but dirt and thorn and a heat so strong it stripped the words from your mouth. Colt Mercer walked a little ahead, slow and sure. Each step pressed into the red road like he was burning a trail only he could follow. He did not look back. Not once. June watched the muscles move in his back under the faded shirt, the places where old wounds had healed ugly. She wondered how many men had tried to cut him down, and how many nights he'd slept in the open with no one to trust. She wondered why, in all that silence, she felt safer than she had in her father's house. At midday they reached Larkspur Ridge, where the land buckled and fell away in rough hollows, shadows moving under the tall saguaro and cottonwood. Colt stopped beside a dry creek bed and crouched, running his fingers through the dust. He pointed. There, hoofprints, not theirs, not old. June's breath caught. "Who's out here?" she said, voice barely more than a whisper. He shook his head, stood, wiped his hands on his jeans. "Doesn't matter. They ain't here for us yet." He walked on. She followed. As the day stretched thin, hunger made June's belly ache. Her mouth was dry as bone. At a shallow bend in the creek, Colt stopped, built a fire out of driftwood and dead mesquite. He set a snare, and an hour later brought back a stringy rabbit. He cut a chunk of meat and held it out to her. She ate slow, careful, her hands shaking. Colt took only a scrap, chewed with a patience born of lean years. Dusk brought a change in the air. The wind cooled, sharp with the scent of sage and coming rain. They sat across the fire, the orange light drawing lines across Colt's face, deepening the quiet. Neither spoke. There was nothing to say that the land didn't already know. That night, with darkness thick around them, June heard coyotes calling from the hills. Her heart raced. She gripped the dull knife Colt had been given, knuckles white. She heard footsteps moving beyond the circle of light, the shift of something heavy in the brush. Colt rose, vanished into the dark, soundless as a shadow. She waited, breath shallow, straining to listen for the sounds of struggle or the sharp crack of violence. Instead, he returned quiet as he'd gone, knelt and poked at the dying fire. "Y'all safe," he said. "Ain't nothing out there but hungry dogs. They won't bother us tonight." He dragged his blanket a pace further away from her. She saw him watching the line where fire met shadow, eyes narrow and thoughtful. In the chill morning, June knelt by a puddle and washed her face. The water was bitter and cold. She looked into the reflection, saw her own eyes, blue-gray and worn, a girl with no place left to call home. When she stood, she saw Colt already saddling the mule. Eyes set on the horizon, he waited for her, saying nothing. They started off again, but the hoofprints from yesterday were doubled now, pressed deep in the soft dirt beside the creek. June touched Colt's sleeve, pointed. He glanced, nodded once. No fear in his face, just the recognition of a fact. Out here, you shared the road with ghosts and men who'd rather see you gone. From then on, Colt walked behind June. His eyes never left the ridges, the tree line, the dips in the ground where a man could hide with a gun. He said nothing about it, and neither did she. Some things didn't need words, only a tightening of the air, a chill you felt in your bones. Near sundown, they crossed a stretch of flatland scattered with crow feathers and old fence posts. A buzzard circled overhead. June shivered. She turned to Colt. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, voice dry and cracked. He shrugged, boots scuffing dust. "Wherever you want, I reckon. I ain't your jailer." She stopped. "I was sold like a mule, mister. Ain't got a home left. Not sure I ever did." Colt's face didn't change, but for a moment she thought she saw something pass behind his eyes. A flicker of hurt, or maybe regret. He looked past her to where the sky bled out behind the ridge. "We keep walking? That's what we do?" He bent and picked up something from the dust. He held it up, a spent lead bullet, a fresh. "Men," he said, just that, and for the first time June understood how silence could be sharper than a blade. The fire that night was small and mean. Colt sat with his back to the world. June watched him, watched the way his hand hovered near the knife, the way his eyes never slept. She understood that whatever he was, whatever they called him, he was not her jailer. He was just another soul walking a road that promised nothing but tomorrow. Hellbender Narrows was nothing but a cut in the stone, where the wind howled even in dead heat, and the sun could not always find you. The ground was choked with gravel, the air so tight it pressed on the ribs. Colt led the mule, June behind him, her steps careful on the loose rock. They rounded a bend and stopped. 4 men blocked the path, horses twitching at the reins, red scarves knotted at their throats. At their head, a man with a jaw like a broken fence post grinned with his eyes, not his mouth. He spat into the dirt, smiled at June like he was looking over a piece of stock at auction. "Pretty little debt," he drawled. "Didn't reckon she'd be worth so much trouble." Colt's body barely moved, but June saw his hand slip closer to the hilt of that dull knife. He stood between her and the men, shoulders broad, casting shadow. The second man stepped forward, eyes bright with something mean. He pulled his revolver, but before the cylinder cleared leather, Colt's hand shot out, faster than breath, caught his wrist, and twisted. There was a pop like a branch breaking. The gun hit the stones. The man screamed, dropped to his knees. A third man charged, blade flashing. Colt didn't flinch. He ducked the swing, drove his shoulder into the man's gut, and the air rushed out of him with a grunt. Colt pulled the knife and, with a motion almost gentle, buried it in the side of the man with the gun. June stood frozen, the world gone silent except for her heart. The leader, Wade Briscoe, watched Colt like a man watching a wild animal, half in awe and half in fear. The last of the 4, a kid, really, jumped for the mule's reins, tore loose the animal and scrambled into the narrows. The others didn't follow. Blood pooled in the gravel. Colt stood over it all, chest heaving, blood running down his own arm. "They'll be back," he said, voice flat, "with more." June found her hands trembling. She tore a strip from her skirt and stepped to Colt, pressing the cloth to the wound. She saw his face up close, sweat and dust, eyes as gray and deep as river stones. He didn't pull away, just watched her as she worked. She didn't ask if it hurt. He didn't say thank you. They both understood. Those words were too soft for this place. They moved on, leaving the bodies and the blood behind. The sky grew ugly, a bruised purple rolling in from the west. Hail began to fall, stones sharp as teeth, biting at their skin, rattling off the rocks. Colt called out over the roar. "Up there, Pine Bone Range, move!" They scrambled up the incline, June's boots slipping on wet stone, her breath sharp and ragged in her throat. Colt's wound bled through the bandage, leaving spots on the pale rock. He didn't slow. By the time they reached a thin stand of pine at the top, both were soaked, shivering. June dropped to her knees, hands raw and bleeding. Colt crouched beside her, breathing hard, eyes searching the horizon. In that pause, the world was nothing but wind and thunder, the smell of rain and blood and old fear. Colt spoke softer than she'd ever heard him. "My name's Colt Mercer. Some folks call me Greyhawk. They do it behind my back." June nodded. "Names don't mean much out here," she said. He looked at her, and something in his face eased. Just a little. "They will. Someday." The storm beat down, but together in the pines they found a kind of shelter, if not warmth. Below them, in the dying light, the bodies in the narrows began to wash away. Cottonwood Lake was a place the world had forgotten. The water was dark, thick with shadow, and the air was heavy with the rot of last year's leaves. The cabin stood at the edge, roof sagging, porch half rotted, glass long gone from the windows. It was not home, but it was the only place left. Colt led June to the door and shouldered it open. Inside was cold and musty, the corners filled with the husks of old mice and the quiet echo of lost things. He said nothing, just set his pack in the corner and crouched by the hearth, coaxing a flame out of what was left in the woodpile. June set about gathering, hands stiff with cold. She found some wild onions near the waterline, a root or two, the stringy meat Colt had trapped days before. The stew she made was thin and bitter, but it was warm. Colt ate without a word, eyes fixed on the fire, the wound at his arm seeping blood through the bandage. That night, Colt's fever came. His teeth rattled, sweat beading on his brow. June watched him fight the shakes, saw the ghost of pain chase him through his sleep. She sat beside him, reading softly from a battered Bible she found in a drawer, the words little more than breath in the room. Colt listened, silent, his eyes closed, but not asleep. Days ran together. In the mornings, Colt showed her how to set a bird snare, how to read the cloud shapes and judge the hour by the slant of the sun. He moved slow, wounded, but sure. June watched his hands, the patience in them, the steadiness that spoke of years spent with nothing but time and trouble. At night their beds drew closer, not touching, not speaking of it. But the cold made confessions out of silence. The fire was never quite enough, but somehow the space between them grew a little less each night. They found signs of strangers, hoofprints at the muddy shore, a curl of smoke on the far side of the lake that vanished when June went out to look. Colt studied the ground, eyes sharp, jaw set. "Worse than outlaws," he said, voice low. "Men with papers. They come with the law behind them, and they don't leave empty-handed." June felt the chill in her bones then. She reached out and put her hand on Colt's just once, just for the weight of it. He didn't pull away. They sat that way as the fire burned down, hands joined like a promise neither dared to name. A gunshot rang out in the dusk, sharp and sudden. June flinched. A bullet buried itself in the porch post. Splinters flying. Colt was on his feet in a breath, eyes burning. June saw the calm on his face, the quiet violence waiting. He looked at her. "Pack your things," he said. "We can't stay." The rain came that night, pounding on the broken roof, soaking the floor, running down the walls in rivers. June and Colt sat by the fire, their hands joined tight, letting the silence say what words could not. In the morning they left the cabin behind. The lake watched them go, silent as always. Colt glanced back once, and June wondered if he was measuring what was lost, or what might still be saved. They turned their faces toward Bitterbrush Basin, toward whatever waited in the hills. Somewhere behind them, the sound of the wind moved through the trees, as if remembering them already. They came to Bitterbrush Basin with the wind at their backs, the scent of sage heavy and the dust rising in sheets behind each step. The land rolled out, wild and unsettled, where grass grew in thick mats and cottonwoods stood like sentinels. Here the world felt older, as if every stone remembered the blood that had been spilled upon it. Colt led June toward a cluster of hides and canvas, a settlement small and wary on the edge of the basin. The smell of smoke and roasting meat drifted on the air. The people here did not speak loud or quick. They watched from the shadow of tents, eyes sharp, faces lined by sun and wind. Aunt Luda Greyhawk stood at the center, long braids streaked silver, her stare as hard as hammered steel. She looked at June, slow and deliberate, her voice flat as winter earth. "She's white." It was not a question. Colt's voice answered, quiet and certain. "She's mine." The words dropped like stones in a still pond. No one spoke. The fire snapped and popped. Luda turned away, motioning June to follow her. June's hands shook, but she kept her eyes level, not out of pride, but because she knew this was no place for weakness. There were others, Kiona, the healer, with her fingers stained by roots and berries. Bear Son, a young man teaching boys how to draw a bow without snapping the string. Some women tended a line of racks hung with meat and herbs, working in silence, their glances sharp. June helped where she could. She learned to clean a hide, to string rabbit on a spit, to sit without fidgeting while Kiona sorted herbs. The first nod from Kiona felt like a benediction. It did not come easily. Colt worked beside Bear Son, fixing saddles, sharpening tools, never saying more than was needed. The scars on his back seemed less out of place here, among others who carried their own history in silence. That night, under a low moon, the children played by the fire while the elders spoke in their own tongue. June sat with the women, listening, learning. Her hands found rhythm in sewing, the thread smooth against her fingers, but the basin was never truly safe. In the darkness beyond the firelight, the red scarves of the outlaw gang flickered between the sage, their shadows long, their intentions longer. June woke to the sound of a twig snapping. She slipped from the tent, heart pounding. Colt stood already in the shadows, knife drawn, face unreadable. Wade Briscoe's men crawled low, thinking themselves unseen. June knelt beside a young girl, whispering her quiet, steady, teaching her to breathe with the earth and wait. The outlaws struck fast, gunfire flashing like lightning. Bear Son went down in the first hail. Colt moved silent, swift, a force of the land itself. June did not hesitate. She pulled a rifle from the rack, leveled it at the man raising his pistol toward Colt. The shot rang out. The man dropped, more surprise than pain in his eyes. After the smoke cleared, June stood over the rifle, hands shaking, breath sharp. Colt found her there. His eyes shone not with anger or pride, but with the sadness of understanding. He touched her shoulder just once. "You did what you had to." They buried Bear Son before dawn. The people gathered sang low in a tongue June could not follow, but the sorrow was plain. Luda stood over the grave, her voice shaking for the first time June had ever heard. The fires burned low, their warmth not enough. News spread before the day was full, soldiers coming, papers in hand, riding to sweep the basin clean for the sake of order. Colt looked at the hills, the sky, the line of June's shoulders. "Men with guns and words ain't never brought peace," he said. June nodded. Her hands were still stained with earth and blood, and she was not sorry. As the sun climbed over Bitterbrush, June felt for the first time that she might be one of them, not because she was welcome, but because she stayed. In the hush before sleep, Colt sat beside her, sharpening a knife with slow, careful strokes. He did not look up. "You got a name for yourself now," he said, "whether you want it or not." June watched the firelight flicker on his face. "I'll wear it then." And in the dark, with the scent of sage on the wind, she was not afraid. Morning broke cold and thin, the trees dripping with old rain, the grass silver with last night's frost. June was chopping kindling outside the tent when she saw them first, a shimmer on the horizon, like water that never arrives. Then the line resolved. Horses, flags, men in blue, the kind that marched for pay and called it justice. They stopped at the edge of Willowcut, where the ground sank and the fog hung low. June felt Colt move beside her, slow as old grief. He did not speak, just checked the knife at his belt and laid a hand on her shoulder before walking forward. 30 men in blue, led by one whose boots never found mud, whose brass shone in the gray light. Captain Ward McAllister rode at the front, his eyes flat as the coins in a church plate. He dismounted slow, removing his gloves with a precision that looked like disdain. He looked at June, and for a moment there was only the breath between them, the memory of another life, one she'd left, one he hadn't earned the right to grieve. "June Whitlow," he said, "you're alive." "I was never dead," she answered, chin high. Ward looked past her to Colt, his lips curled, not quite a sneer. "You running with him now, this half-breed?" The word hung sharp in the cold. June didn't flinch. "I chose," she said, voice a flat stone in the river. "I ain't lost." Ward turned, voice dropping so only she could hear. "They told me you were stolen. I rode half a state looking for you." She kept her eyes on him, hard and clear. "Nobody stole me, not even you, Ward." His jaw tightened. The men behind him shuffled, eyes shifting from Colt to the ground and back again. Ward lifted a folded paper, the red wax glinting. "The government claims this land now," he said. "All of you have 7 days to vacate. You can come back to town, June. You can start over. This ain't your place." Colt stood beside her, silent, his presence like a boulder in floodwater. He said nothing. He didn't have to. June stared at the paper, then back at Ward. "I ain't leaving," she said. He stepped closer, voice gentle now. "You don't have to do this, not for pride, not for—" He nodded at Colt, as if afraid to finish the thought. She shook her head. "It's not pride, it's just living with what you choose." Ward looked at her a long time, then sighed, stepping back. He spoke louder, to the crowd behind her. 7 days, he repeated. "After that, we come back, and we won't show mercy." He mounted up, stiff and careful, turning his horse with military grace. The company wheeled behind him, a wave of blue and brass disappearing into the trees, dust and frost rising in their wake. The people watched them go, shoulders hunched, eyes dark with the knowing. No one spoke until the last hoofbeat faded. Only then did the world begin to move again. Colt put a hand on June's shoulder, heavy and warm. He didn't squeeze, didn't speak, just let the weight of it steady her. Her knees wanted to buckle, but she stood. That night, as dusk bled across the basin, the elders gathered around the fire. June sat beside Colt, the circle tight, every face lit orange and gold. Old voices whispered, plans were made, oaths taken. They would not run. Outside the ring of light, the shadows listened. Somewhere in the dark, Ward was waiting too, on the edge of memory, on the far side of every choice she'd ever made. 7 days is a short mercy on the land. It passes in dust, in the shuffle of feet, in the soft mutter of plans whispered at dusk. The people of Bitterbrush Basin moved through the mornings and nights like animals with a scent of storm in their blood. June rose each day to find a new task pressed into her hands, training young boys to load a rifle, teaching girls the sure grip of a knife, sewing new shirts for children with eyes too old for their years. Colt slipped through the shadows, scouting trails, erasing tracks, showing men how to string up snares that could break a horse's leg or lay a man out flat if he wasn't careful. Each night he returned with a branch snapped, a hand signal, a warning in the hush. They're coming sooner than they say. June led the women and older children down to the marsh, hands muddy, faces streaked with sweat and soot, showing them how to move when the world catches fire. She'd lived under threat long enough to know sometimes the only way to survive is to vanish. Fog rolled low one night, moonless, the fires dimmed to embers. In the hush, a voice cut through the reeds. June spun, heart in her throat. Ward stepped into the half-light, uniform stripped to nothing but a long coat, hat in his hand. He tried a smile, came to talk. She didn't lower the rifle. "You came to see if I'd run. I won't." He shook his head, the lines in his face deeper, older than she remembered. "Why him, June? Why stay with people who'd never claim you for their own?" Her eyes hardened. "Because I chose them. Because he never asked me to be less than I am." Ward's mouth twisted, but he stepped back into the mist. 7 days, maybe less. The world felt smaller when he was gone. June stood a long time watching the grass bend, remembering all the winters she survived without a hand to hold. She was not the same girl he'd left behind. Colt found her before dawn, his shadow falling across her like a comfort. "Storm's near," he said, and it was true in every sense. Morning broke with a kind of dread that made even the birds go quiet. The company of bluecoats came down from the ridge, rifles slung, boots heavy. They found the settlement empty, fires cold, nothing but footprints and the hush of the wind. Ward rode at the head, eyes narrowed. One soldier stepped too fast, triggered a snare. Branches crashed down, thorn and bone snapping, a shout of pain lost in the chaos. Arrows flew from the tall grass. Colt led from the western edge, rifle in hand, moving like a shadow, never staying long enough for lead to find him. June crouched in the reeds by the creek, squeezing the trigger, sending a round through the wheel of a field cannon before it could bark. Men shouted, horses screamed. The blue line broke, split, and stumbled back into the trees. But the valley did not escape unscathed. 3 of their own would not return. Their bodies were wrapped in blankets and laid in the earth before the sun. Oa rose. That night, Luda sang the old song, voice cracking on every note. June knelt with her head bowed, grief knotted tight in her chest. Word came before morning, a red sealed order darker than before. 30 days, it said, then exile. Resistance would mean the valley burned to ash. Colt stood by June reading the letter in the weak light. "They don't mean to make peace," he said. "They mean to make an end." June nodded. She wasn't afraid, not of death, not anymore. What haunted her was the emptiness that would follow if they lost. In the quiet, the fire cracked. Colt stared into it, eyes the color of old storm, and June understood what it meant to be unbroken, even as the world closed in. The letter with the red seal weighed heavy in June's coat, colder than any pistol or blade. She read it 3 times beneath the aspen trees before dawn, Colt's hand steady at her back. No one told her to go, no one had to. There are burdens that belong only to those willing to carry them. She left before first light, Colt saddling the mule, Luda wrapping a bundle of dried meat in a scrap of cloth. "Don't trust their words, child," she said, pressing a charm of braided willow into June's hand. "Trust only the face that looks back in your mirror." June rode across the basin with the wind in her eyes through sage and rock and stretches of land that remembered blood. She crossed 2 rivers, forded a 3rd. By sundown the mountains were a memory behind her, and the road wound toward High Mesa, the county seat, a town made of sawed planks and brick, its windows dark with dust. At the courthouse they made her wait. Men in black coats passed her by, never meeting her eyes. When she finally faced the general, his medals caught the light, but his eyes stayed flat, practiced at looking through people. She put the letter and a folded list of names on the desk, names of the living and the dead, each a kind of claim staked in sorrow. He glanced at the paper, then at her. "You're just one woman," he said, tired. "You think the law will bend for a single voice?" June kept her chin up, her voice a thread pulled taut. "Maybe not, but it'll remember me. And someday you'll have to answer for what you did when you could have chosen different." The general rubbed his face, already thinking of other things. He said the order would stand. June left the courthouse as night fell, the streets empty but for the sound of a saloon piano in the distance and the soft scuff of her boots on old boards. She slept outside town in the lee of a grain shed, rain peppering the roof until her dreams ran thin. By morning, the world felt no different. She rode home in silence, each mile heavier than the last, dreading what she'd say to those waiting, to Colt's quiet eyes and Luda's silent strength. But the valley knows hope in strange forms. Weeks passed, then a courier came, young, muddy, his horse lathered. He brought a new letter, the seal broken by travel, the words rough and hurried. The order to expel them had been revoked. No reason given, no promises made. At the bottom, a hand unfamiliar had scrawled 3 words, "Let her stay." There was no celebration, no shouts or singing. The people of Bitterbrush Basin hugged each other in the cold, heads bent, breath white in the air. Colt stood by June, and for the first time she saw him smile, truly smile, the lines at his eyes deepening, his hand finding hers as if it belonged there all along. Even in the hush of relief, the land bristled with rumor. Another army coming, more orders, more men with maps and plans and the cold certainty of progress. But for now, in the heart of the basin, June and Colt watched the sun set behind the willows and dared to think, just for a night, that peace might last. Peace is never owed, never promised, and always thinner than it looks. The days that followed in Bitterbrush Basin came soft and slow, as if the world were holding its breath. Colts grazed in the high pasture. The air tasted of cut hay, wood smoke, the cool rush of Willow Creek tumbling over stones. Colt built a toy horse out of scrap wood, his hands rough and patient, smoothing the grain for a dark-haired boy whose father had never come home from the last raid. June watched from the porch, sunlight in her hair, teaching a half-dozen children their letters with charcoal on pine shingles. Her voice was softer now. She found herself laughing again, surprised at the sound. They fixed the roof on the grain shed, shored up the fence at the far end of the meadow. Luda taught June a Comanche lullaby, the melody thin as thread and twice as strong. At night, June sat by Colt on the step, the world gone to shadow, their boots touching under the bench. Sometimes neither of them spoke for hours, and that was fine. A wedding was held beneath the birch trees, 2 young people tying hands with rough twine, hope outshining the wariness in their eyes. There was stew, a little whiskey, and a fiddle so out of tune it made everyone smile. June carved a place for herself, sewing, planting, reading stories by firelight. She learned to skin a rabbit and how to mend a split rail. She learned the way a man can be strong in silence and how a child's laughter can push the ache from a wounded day. But peace is a skittish colt. Word came from the scouts. Blue coats on the horizon, metal glinting like knives. The army was coming back, this time with more men, real cannon, and orders that made no room for appeals. Ward was with them, the one who could have been her old life, the one who'd never learned how to stay. Ward rode up that night, helmet under his arm, paper in hand. The words were clear: surrender or face the end. He looked at June for a long moment, his eyes tired, asking questions he had no right to ask. June shook her head. "No," she said, voice steady. "This is my place." Later, in the hush before dawn, Colt wrote a letter in the half-light, 2 lines tucked into a worn leather pouch. "If I fall, burn this. Keep the land." He didn't ask her to promise. He didn't need to. That night, the insects stopped singing. The hush was so deep it hurt. June held Colt's hand, feeling the scar on his knuckle, the heat of his palm, the life that pulsed beneath every quiet, ordinary mercy. Beyond the hills, the army waited for sunrise. In the cabin, June and Colt waited for whatever came next, and neither of them would give an inch. It began with the thunder of guns, not the quick pop of rifles, but the deep, soul-shaking roar of cannon. Dawn was a smear of smoke and yellow light over Bitterbrush Basin. The soldiers came as promised, boots pounding, bayonets fixed. The blue line stretched across the hills like a wound that would not heal. Colt led the defense at the southern fence, his face unreadable. He moved like someone who had known this day would come, who had studied every stone, every ditch, every blind corner in the land. June crouched in the barn with Luda and the children, heart-pounding, rifle cocked, eyes fixed on the door. The first wave hit hard, axes biting through the barricades, the air thick with splinters and shouted orders. June fired twice, dropping a soldier whose face she would not remember. The children ran, just as she'd taught them, crawling through the east tunnel into the cave below the ridge. Smoke stung her eyes. Somewhere outside she heard Bearson yelling, cut short by the snap of a rifle. Luda knelt beside a wounded boy, pressing cloth to the wound, singing low and fierce. Colt fought in silence. His staff swung heavy, breaking bone, scattering men. His leg buckled once, blood streaming from a gash in his thigh, but he did not fall. In the confusion, a soldier leveled a rifle at Colt's back. June saw him, heart stopping. She ran, hands fumbling for the old revolver in Colt's belt. She pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, louder than any word she'd ever spoken. The man dropped, eyes wide, his blood black in the morning light. The gun fell from June's hand, her arms trembling. Colt turned, saw her, and in his eyes was not surprise, but the hard, sad recognition of what it costs to survive. She dragged him to cover, Luda and Kiona working quickly, packing his wound with bitter-smelling leaves, hands steady as stone. Colt gritted his teeth but did not cry out. Ward's men broke through at the west fence. For a moment the world spun into chaos, shouting, trampling, the crack of cannon fire as the big gun wheeled, then crashed to the ground, its axle split by a lucky shot from the reeds. Ward himself was knocked aside, crawling from the fray, his blue coat streaked with mud and shame. By the time the sun clawed over the ridge, the fighting was done. The soldiers scattered, dragging their wounded, leaving the cannons smoking and broken in the weeds. 3 of Bitterbrush's own would never stand again. June knelt beside their bodies, the hush of the valley heavier than the smoke. That night the survivors gathered around the fire. Luda's song was a whisper, broken by sobs. Colt sat with his back against the porch, legs stretched out, June's hand wrapped around his. No one spoke of victory, only what had been lost and what it would take to go on. In the quiet, Colt pressed a folded note into June's palm. If I don't rise with the sun, burn this. Keep the land. Promise me, June. She nodded, the words thick in her throat. Outside, the moon broke through the clouds, shining silver on the battered fences and the graves dug shallow and hurried. Tomorrow would bring a new threat. Tonight the valley grieved, and somewhere in the dark an eagle fell, silent and unseen, as if to warn them all. There are losses you see coming, and those that cut out of nowhere. The day after the fight, Colt could not walk far. His wound leaked dark blood, every step a fight with gravity. June kept her arm under him, stubborn and quiet, as if holding him upright could bend the world her way. But the council gathered, and the choice was no longer theirs alone. The valley was battered and raw, fences half gone, smoke still curling from blackened posts. Scouts returned with word. Another company would come, stronger, angrier, and this time with no reason to hold back. The elders decided the only chance was to split. A handful would ride south, bait the soldiers away, buy the rest enough time to escape into the hills. Colt did not argue. He only held June's gaze with that patient weight she knew too well, the one that said more than any promise. He pressed a rough kiss to her forehead. "I'll be back, darling." His voice was as close to tender as it ever got. She did not cry. She helped him onto the mule, stuffed dried meat and water into his saddlebag, and watched the 6 men ride into the mist, the sound of their hooves the only goodbye she would ever get. The valley grew quiet, too quiet. The women packed in silence, children hiding fear in the hard work of moving. June kept her hands busy, eyes on the ridge, heart in her throat. 2 days passed, then 3. Then the scout returned, riding hard, his face streaked with mud and blood. He dropped at the gate, breathless, wild-eyed. "Ambush!" he gasped. "Colt stayed to hold the pass, told us to ride. I don't know if—" June did not wait. She took a knife, a pouch of herbs, her lamp. No one tried to stop her. Sometimes grief makes its own room in the world. She rode up the pass, the night falling like a curse. She found the trail marked with blood, a tuft of black hair snagged on a branch, boot prints dragging through the mud. The air stank of gunpowder and broken promise. She followed the signs, every step an act of will. The hill grew steeper. The wind howled and pulled at her coat, but she pressed on, calling his name into the dark, voice shredded and raw. At last, under a tangle of maple and wild rose, she found him, Colt, half buried in fallen leaves, one leg twisted, blood black on his thigh. He looked up when she knelt, his lips cracked in a shape halfway to a smile. "Told you I'd be back," he said, weak as rain. She pressed her forehead to his, the lamp's glow painting them in gold. "You ain't leaving me," she whispered. "Not here." She spent the night cleaning the wound, binding it tight, feeding him water in small sips. She did not sleep. Neither did he. The night stretched long, filled with pain and hope and the stubborn refusal to surrender. For 7 days they hid by the stream at the pass. June hunted rabbit, washed Colt's wound in cold water, sang lullabies in a voice she hardly recognized as her own. When at last he could stand, barely, they left the hill behind, the road home, changed forever. There are places you can't go back from, even when you survive. June and Colt walked slowly, her arm around his waist. The world smaller and harder and somehow more precious for all they had nearly lost. They walked slow, 2 figures against the dawn, shadows drawn long in the dew-soaked grass. Sagebrush meadow stretched out wide and empty, the river running slow and deep on its eastern edge. June's arm never left Colt's waist. She kept him upright with the same stubbornness that had dragged him out of death's way on the ridge. His limp was heavy, every step a prayer unanswered, but he did not ask for help. Not with words, anyway. When they came into the new camp, the people watched in silence, as if not daring to believe their eyes. Colt's scars spoke for him. The limp was proof enough. They reached out, Luda, Kiona, even old Bear Son's widow, who pressed a hand to Colt's shoulder and nodded once. A recognition passed in quiet. A real house waited, a shack of green pine, rough-hewn, not much to look at but solid. June swept the floor, set up her blanket in the corner, hung Colt's old coat on a wooden peg by the door. They built a hearth from river rock. The first fire they lit together was small, barely enough to warm their hands, but it was theirs. Colt's leg healed slow. He walked the lines of the meadow with a staff, teaching the children how to look for snakes, how to see a trail where others saw only grass. He told them the story of every scar, his voice low, never asking for sympathy. The children listened. Some touched the scars as if feeling for magic. June dug her hands in the earth, planting beans along the fence, turning the soil over and over until her fingers bled. She found peace in the motion, a rhythm she could keep when the world was too quiet. Sometimes at night she'd mend the old gloves Colt wore, each stitch steady, prayers wound into the leather, as if keeping him whole one more day. Luda brought a totem, 2 carved birds' tails entwined, and planted it at the edge of the garden. "For what's held together," she said, voice gravelly. "For what's come home." June did not weep, though she wanted to. On clear nights they listened to the rain, lying side by side, eyes open to the dark, measuring the space between heartbeats and thunder. The days blurred. Work and rest, hunger and laughter, sorrow and the stubborn hope that home could be built from so little. But danger never faded. At the far end of the meadow, scouts found a new paper stuck to the gatepost, sealed in black wax. No words but the threat, leave or be cleared, no more warnings. June read the message aloud by firelight, her voice flat. Colt stared into the flames, his jaw working, but he said nothing. They'd come too far to run now. In the hush that followed, June stitched the old gloves for Colt, mending the world as best she could. He watched her, eyes shining in the eye. Fire's light, and for a moment the old ache softened, replaced by something steadier, something that could last. Whatever came, they would face it together, backs against the same wall, holding on to the fire they had built from the ashes of what was lost. Autumn came cold and sharp to Sagebrush Meadow, the wind stinging with a taste of snow. The children ran through the last gold leaves, laughter drifting thin as smoke. But each morning June found herself looking east, searching for dust, for riders, for the promise of trouble that always came with the first frost. The new order was posted at dawn. A young rider, barely more than a boy, handed it over without meeting her eye. The black seal gleamed like spilled oil. 30 days, he muttered, to clear out or be cleared. Then he rode away, fast, as if chased by what he carried. June stood a long time in the yard, reading and rereading the words, feeling them settle like stones in her chest. She watched Colt chop wood, each swing of the axe slower than the last, pain showing now, not hidden. She carried the order inside, set it on the table, and poured herself coffee, hands steady. Colt came in, sweat cold on his brow. He saw the letter, didn't touch it. "They won't listen," he said. June didn't answer. That night, after the others slept, she sat by the window and watched the stars. The words of the old song Luta taught her drifted through her mind, half in Comanche, half in memory. At last she rose, packed a small bag, and tucked the letter deep inside. "They'll remember," she said to the dark. "If not me, then the land." She rode north again, alone. The town at High Mesa hadn't changed, except the faces were younger, more nervous, eyes flickering away from her own. The new official behind the desk, hands too clean, voice unsteady, listened as she read the names, those buried in the valley, those who still clung to it. He shuffled his papers. "It's government land now," he said, not looking at her. "There's nothing I can do." June's voice was soft but unbroken. "You'll remember this one day. Every stone you move, every grave you forget, you'll remember." She left the letter, turned, and walked out into the wind. Back in the meadow, time blurred. Children grew tall. The old became stories. Luda passed one spring, her voice joining the wind. Colt limped more each season, but never sat still. He taught the smallest children to fish, his voice as steady as the river, his hands always warm, no matter the cold. One night, as the stars burned blue and bright, Colt did not wake. June found him at dawn, breath gone, face peaceful, hands curled around the old gloves she had stitched for him so many times. She sat beside him until the sun reached the door, singing the song Luda gave her, her voice thin and strong. They buried him under the birch, beside Luda and Bearson, with the totem of 2 birds carved above. The valley mourned, not with wailing, but with silence and the smell of wood smoke, with the planting of beans and the mending of fences, with the telling of stories that kept his name alive in every heart. The order to leave never came again. One spring a letter arrived, unsealed, unsigned. "Let her stay," it read. June smiled, folded it away, and went back to her work. Years passed. She taught the new children to read, to shoot, to plant, to remember. She tended Colt's grave, polished the totem, kept the cabin clean. She told the stories, every one of them ending in the same place, here in the meadow, where a man who was feared became the reason for staying, and a woman who had nothing left to lose built a home out of the world's forgetting. Some nights she sat by the hearth, the fire burning low, the gloves soft in her lap, and she would close her eyes and listen to the wind, to the creek, to the memory of a voice that never said much, but never left. Winter came slow, then all at once, snow falling thick on the old birch, the world gone to white and silence. June moved through the cabin, hair silver at her temples, steps careful but sure. She kept Colt's gloves by the hearth, oiled and soft, each stitch a memory she could still feel in her bones. Some morning she would sit and mend them out of habit, thread slipping through old scars, as if sewing could summon back time. She kept his room as he left it, coat hung on its peg, boots by the door, the toy horse on the shelf for any child brave enough to take it down. She swept the floor, kept the fire burning. Some evenings the children came with their questions, settling by her feet to hear stories. She would tell them, her voice thin as willow bark but steady. They called him a feared rancher. To me, he was the softest thing in this world. She walked the creek every thaw, water sharp and cold, the banks worn with years. Sometimes she'd talk aloud, words floating over the ice. "You don't ever keep a person," she'd say. "You only keep the way they kept you, that's all." The years gathered behind her, slow as drifts. Ward came through the valley one last time, older, limping, hat in his hand. He watched from a distance, never stepping close, eyes full of what might have been. June nodded at him from the porch, a peace of sorts, or maybe just the mercy of letting go. One late snow, the children built a house of sticks and mud by the old totem. They called it their fort, a place where secrets were kept and laughter was safe. June sat by the birch, the totem of two birds behind her, and listened to the sound, joy not born of safety but of having survived danger together. That night, as the logs popped in the hearth and wind scraped the roof, June sat with the gloves in her lap. The house felt both full and empty, echoing with the steps and laughter of lives gone ahead. She pressed her palm to the warm leather, eyes shining. "I ain't leaving," she whispered to the dark. Snow thickened outside. In the cabin, the fire held, a stubborn light against the cold. The stories went on, of the rancher who was feared, of the girl who stayed, of a place built out of loss and found in the telling. In time, they buried June beside Colt, no crosses, just the totem and the hush of willow leaves. The valley endured, home for those who remembered and those who simply belonged. And when the wind blew through sagebrush meadow, sometimes it sounded like a promise, sometimes like a prayer, always like love that never left. If this story struck a chord with you, just drop a simple 0 or 1 down below. Let me know you're out there. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more real tales from the Wild West. Every comment, even the quiet ones, helps these old stories find their way to another porch light. Stick around, there's always another journey just over the next ridge.